What's up everybody, how's it going? It's Burke aka Dansgoet here, and this video is going to be me talking about Final Fantasy Mobius and the Final Fantasy X collaboration chapter / episode thing that they did. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about, I will quickly talk about what Final Fantasy Mobius is. I think it's called Mobius Final Fantasy officially. It's like a Square Enix Final Fantasy RPG game that they designed mainly for iOS and Android, so to be played on mobile devices. I don't know too much about the game, but ever since they announced this Dream Within a Dream collaboration thing with Final Fantasy X, where we'd be getting more cutscenes and more story to do with Final Fantasy X, a lot of people have been tweeting it at me and wanting me to check it out and that kind of stuff. So I did just that today, and I'm here to share my thoughts with you about what is going on in this game and whether it's worth playing it or worth watching it, etc, etc. So before getting into this, you just want to watch the Mobius Final Fantasy Dream Within a Dream collaboration thingy. I'll put a link in the description where you can see like a really nice 3-hour movie version of it, so you can see the entire episode play out. But if you just want me to talk about what's going on with the story there and what I think of it and whether it's kind of worth spending your time on, you can just skip that and continue with the video, because in my personal opinion, I don't think you lose too much by not sitting down and watching that for 3 hours, and I will explain why in a second. So this video will contain spoilers for Final Fantasy X, of course, Final Fantasy X-2, the Final Fantasy X story in general. It will also contain spoilers for that particular episode of Mobius Final Fantasy, and I will be giving you guys a brief summary of what happens in the story anyway. So let's talk about that first. So the premise here is that the story takes place between the events of Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy X-2. So at the end of Final Fantasy X, we defeat Sin, and we have the bittersweet ending where Tidus has to fade from Spira and disappears from the world, and it looks like he's headed to the far plane, where Auron, Braska and Jecht are. So that's like the final cutscene we get where he disappears from Spira. In Dream Within a Dream, Tidus wakes up after disappearing from Spira, and he's in like a foreign land that he doesn't recognize. His first thought is that he's on the far plane, but it turns out he's actually in another world called Palamecia. So he's not actually on the far plane, he's not even really dead, but he's been transported to another world. So we're not going to get into the details and the whys and the whats, I just want to explain to you briefly what happens in the story. So he wakes up in Palamecia, then the protagonist of Mobius meets with Tidus and they have conversation, etc. And the gist of it is that there is a crystal which will give them a glimpse into their future. What happens on Palamecia apparently is that there is this prophecy about a warrior of light who will appear, and whoever becomes the warrior of light will save Palamecia from all of the monsters and all of the bad stuff that happens there. So we don't need to get too much into the story of Mobius. I'm more focused on, Tidus and what's going to happen with him within the context of this story. So that's one reason why the 3-hour movie version is good, but I would say maybe like 20-30% of it is actually related to Final Fantasy X and Tidus' story specifically. So that's maybe why you don't need to sit down for 3 hours and watch that entire thing play out. But it's totally up to you. If you're already sold on it, then go ahead and watch it right now. So yes, we cut forward to the crystal, and this crystal shows Tidus Dream Zanarkand, the one that he's originally from, the one that we see at the start of Final Fantasy X, the city that never sleeps, all of that kind of business. So after this little episode where he sees his Dream Zanarkand, he's transported to a Zanarkand that is in ruin. So it looks very much like the one that's in Spira. In terms of how he gets there, I believe this is where the Dream Within a Dream thing kicks in. So he hasn't really returned to Spira. He's in like a dream version of Spira at the moment. Much like how it plays out in Final Fantasy X, he accepts his fate in Palamecia, and he realizes that there's probably not going to be any way of him ever returning to Spira again. He decides to try and become the Warrior of Light, and he thinks, well, considering the fact that I'm stuck in Palamecia, I might as well try and fulfill this prophecy and become the Warrior of Light and save Palamecia from its terrible situation. Eventually though, as time goes on, Tidus starts to lose his focus about trying to become the Warrior of Light and all this kind of business, and there's a little bit of an intense scene where he kind of loses his way, because he realizes that what he's really doing is running from the fact that he's not going to be able to return to Spira. So during this outburst, suddenly Valefor appears before him, Valefor the Aeon from Final Fantasy X. But this Valefor is hostile. After this encounter with Valefor, they battle it out and Tidus wins. Valefor bursts into fireflies and kind of takes Tidus with her to somewhere that kind of looks like the far plane. So it's like a different realm that they've arrived in right now. And while he's in there, he sees a vision of Yuna. and he tries to reach out to her. He can't touch her. It's very much like the ending of Final Fantasy X, but reversed once again. Then he hears Yuna's voice asking where Tidus is. So I think this is supposed to relate back to Final Fantasy X too, and Yuna seeking out Tidus in the far plane and that kind of stuff. After all of this happens, he wakes up in Besaid, and lo and behold, Yuna is there waiting for him on the shore. So they seem to have this reunion on Besaid, but this is, again, because this is a dream within a dream, this isn't like the real Yuna in the real Spira being reunited, but within the context of what Tidus is going through in Palamecia, there is a reunion between him and Yuna. From here on, I'm going to go very quickly. I'm going to skip ahead because there's a lot of like traveling together and fighting different stuff, etc, etc. But what you need to know is these two try to become the Warriors of Light together. They decide to kind of join forces and see if they can do this thing together. But that doesn't go so well because they're outsiders to this world of Palamecia, and they don't obey the rules and the laws of Palamecia as much as they should. They're branded heretics, and they do not have what it takes to become the Warriors of Light. So they have to find like a new hope. And that's when, again, of course, they decide we need to find a way to return to Spira. Then we have the biggest bombshell of the entire story of Dream Within a Dream. After a while, we realized that the Yuna that we've been seeing is not actually the real Yuna, and it's not even like a dream version of Yuna either. It's actually someone or something completely different. So while Tidus is away from this scene, he doesn't realize what's going on. The Mobius protagonist realizes that this isn't actually the real Yuna, so that's a little bit of a crazy situation that happens. Even though it's not the real Yuna, whoever this is or whatever this is, it's someone that wants the best for Tidus and actually does have good intentions and wants to help him. So this fake Yuna's desire is still to see Tidus back in Spira and reunited with his friends over there. So that doesn't really change. Then they theorize that Spira and Palamecia are connected somehow, and of course the thing that connects the two could be the far plane. And the place where the connection might be happening is near the Zanakan ruins, where we were near at the start of the story. So the gang get together again and they head back towards Zanarkand and in search of this connection between Spira and Palamecia so that Tidus can return. So what we have here is a strange situation where Tidus's biggest desire is to get Yuna back to Spira because he thinks like that's like the real Yuna, and the fake Yuna's biggest desire is to get Tidus back to Spira. So that's kind of how the story is progressing at this time. They make it to Zanarkand, they head inside the dome/temple, the old Blitzball Stadium, and there is a crystal there because it's Final Fantasy, and of course there's a crystal. Now the deal is supposedly that this crystal is going to be the thing that can take Tidus and Yuna back home. And the way they're going to do that is they're going to need some Firefly power, because that's what powers everything in Final Fantasy X. So it's again this whole wishy-washy idea of the will, the hope and the desire of the person making the Fireflies react and giving things powers that will be able to change their reality in their situation. So that's where we're at nearer the end of the story. Tidus's emotion about this whole thing is that he knows that he is a dream, he's basically an Aeon, and doesn't feel like he belongs in Spira anymore, because once they defeated Sin, the age of dreaming, the age of Aeons, and the age of summoning has ended, so he doesn't really feel like he has a place back in Spira anymore. So due to him feeling a little bit down about this, he doesn't really have the hope and the will and the desire within him to power up the crystal to its fullest extent. Then it's finally time for Tidus to learn that Yuna is not real. Yuna gives a big speech that kind of gives away the fact that she is not really Yuna, but what she does tell him is that even though he might have disappeared from Spira, his memories live on within the real Yuna, and these memories are what give Yuna hope that she might one day see him again. So as we know from Final Fantasy X-2, Yuna never loses hope that she might be able to reunite with Tidus one day, and that's what drives her. And the fake Yuna tells Tidus about this drive that Yuna has, and the fact that it's her memories of him that cause her to have this drive. So after this scene, Tidus and the protagonist of Mobius, they have a little chat, and Tidus theorizes that this fake Yuna is actually an Aeon from Final Fantasy X, and it's pretty clear that it's Valifor from Final Fantasy X. So the game doesn't explain why this is or how this happens or anything like that, but the fake Yuna is actually Valifor in Yuna's form. So once this speech is over, the fake Yuna disappears, and Tidus starts to think about the fact that even though this Yuna wasn't really real, the time that they spent together within the context of this Mobius story, it was real, it had meaning, and it was valuable to him. And this kind of causes him to realize how Yuna felt about him in Final Fantasy X. So we have this parallel going on here, where Tidus wasn't really real in Final Fantasy X, but what they shared together, the memories they made, the times they had, and everything that they shared in Final Fantasy X did have meaning and was real, and that's why Yuna wants him back so badly. So Tidus starts to feel the same thing in the opposite direction, and the drive within him to see Yuna again and to return to Spira starts to bubble up and take over. Then, of course, because it's a game and we have to have a final boss battle, etc., he has to fight against the protagonist of Mobius. Those two duel it out, and while they're fighting, the idea here being that it's not really about whether Tidus wins or loses, but the fact that he's willing to fight to return and his will to succeed, etc., that is what will end up powering the crystal in the end. So when we get to the end, they finish dueling, Yuna reappears in Zanarkand, and the crystal starts to glow and starts to power up a little bit, and Tidus hears some whistling from inside the crystal. So again, I think this is a quick nod to Final Fantasy X-2 and the whistling that Yuna does on the far plane. So once Tidus hears the whistle, it's time for him to do his thing, and the fake Yuna performs something that looks like ascending, like a ritual of some kind. It pretty much looks like ascending, but I'm not sure how it works within this context anyway. And Tidus will eventually jump into a gateway that appears from the crystal and return back to Spira. So they're trying to say that he had this strange kind of episode in another world during the gap between 10 and 10-2, but their desires to be reunited was what ended up bringing them together in the end. And to be honest, does that add anything new to the story? Not really, because before Mobius, if I was to ask you guys, so why did Tidus and Yuna get reunited in 10-2? Well, you're all going to tell me that it's because of their love for each other and their feelings towards each other, and the fact that Yuna has such a desire and a will to see him, and the faith grant her this gift of bringing Tidus back, etc., etc. So in terms of what Mobius really adds to that whole thing, I can't really say. So that's why I'm saying to you guys that in terms of sitting down and watching the 3-hour, 20-minute story, if you're just doing it because you're really curious about what happens story-wise between Final Fantasy X and 10-2, it's not really going to be that great for you. You're not going to be leaving it feeling like, whoa, that was a hell of a story. I'm really glad I found that out. But let's talk about some more positive things about this whole Mobius thing and why you might still want to check it out anyway. There were some moments in there where I definitely had a smile on my face and I giggled, because now that so much time has passed over the story of Final Fantasy X, certain things have become more iconic and almost meme-ish. So the Tidus laugh, for example, is a meme at this stage. They have a scene with the Tidus laugh, and the protagonist tries to do a Tidus laugh. Is really quite funny. They have lots of references from the first game, so lots of lines that are repeated within different situations, which is quite fun to see. Even there's a little bit where Tidus doesn't even remember his name, and he gets given a blitzball. Apparently he arrives in Palamisia with his blitzball that has his own signature on it, and he reads his own name as Tidus out loud, and he says, "It still seems strange." So for someone like me that's in the Tidus camp, that line was kind of funny to me. So even the fact that no one actually calls him by his real name is something that's referenced within the story, which I thought was kind of fun. Outside of that, the soundtrack, it has some of the best pieces from the Final Fantasy X soundtrack, which is just so good. And hearing those tracks within those locations is, of course, a trip down memory lane. Getting to hear James Arnold Taylor as Tidus again, and Yuna's voice actress, Hedy Barres, I think her name is, hearing her as Yuna once again. There is a lot of dialogue. There's a lot more dialogue and cutscene than I thought there would be. But even though they don't really contribute heavily or in a really powerful way to the Final Fantasy X story and the lore, I would definitely say that for people that just want a 2-3 hours of just a little bit of Final Fantasy X reminiscing and a little trip down memory lane and just the odd cool moment here and there, then it's definitely worth checking out. So that's Mobius Final Fantasy for you guys, and the collaboration with Final Fantasy X. Again, the movie version that I've talked about is linked in the description, and you can check it out if you wish. But those are my thoughts on it. It's nothing major. It's kind of nice that they tried to integrate it into this mobile game. It's just a little something extra. I don't think it really damages Final Fantasy X or X-2 in any way, because unlike the novella and the audio drama Will, which I'll talk about in another video, this is a self-contained story. So fans know that at the end of Final Fantasy X this happens, and at the end of Final Fantasy X-2, this happens. And what happens in between, like, Square Enix pretty much have free reign to kind of just come up with whatever story they like, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really change the outcome. The novella and Will are different because they occur after everything that's happened in, well, not quite, the novella is not quite that, but they pretty much change the situation once the story has already reached its conclusion. So they have a much bigger impact on the story in general and the lore and all that kind of stuff. But for this Mobius thing, it's really not a big deal, even though it's not a great story. I'm not going to be mad about it and say, oh, they really ruined it, oh, they messed it up, why did they do this? For me, it's just like, nah, it's a little trip down memory lane. Doesn't do much for me in terms of story, but it has some pretty fun moments, so it's not too big a deal. So that's Mobius Final Fantasy, guys. Thank you for checking out this video. It's been a long time since I got to talk about Final Fantasy X in this regard, and I know a lot of you tweeted it at me and that kind of thing. It took me a while, but now that the English translations and the English dub for the entire segment is out, I thought it was a good time to check it out and tell you guys what I thought. More Final Fantasy X content coming soon. I've got a few plans. There's a few things I want to talk about, including stuff like the audio drama and that business, and what could potentially be in the future for the Final Fantasy X franchise, I guess, like a franchise within a franchise by now. I don't know, but we'll see. Thank you guys for watching. Take care. I'll see you soon.